start. It's like nothing's working.
Oh, hang on. I've got to rename this.
Is that bad? Or is that just...
No, it's fine. It's just starting
Okay,
up.
cool. So we're live. You get typing. Clickety-clack, Tim. Hopefully this is working. Hopefully the audio is not
I'll just check what I
garbled.
set the stream to output. 6. Yeah, 6 should be manageable, I think.
All right.
Yeah, it dropped a few frames at the start, but it's not anymore. So.
Yeah, it looked pretty ugly at the start. We're streaming off my mobile phone because my NBN, while it seems constant, it's a lot slower than my phone. So hopefully this works. It's been over a year since we've tried streaming from my location. So anyway, you posted a link, have you?
Yeah. I'm just going to keep an eye on the stream to make sure that we're not...
I'm just going to play the audio through my laptop for a
die.
second, just to make sure it's not scrambled or something.
Yeah, I should probably also get on the Patreon and post the link there.
Yep, post that so we can get a few people in here before we start. Let's just see that the audio is working. Yep, post that so we can get Yep, audio is working. Excellent. Alright. And I can even read the chat.
Nice.
How about that?
We can chat to people while I deal with this shit. Oh, you might need to Patreon verify me, by the way. You know how every single time we ever do this...
Well, it'll come up on the phone.
Yeah, it's so annoying.
Yeah.
I mean, two-factor authentication is good in general, but bad for every time I try and use Patreon outside of my house.
Alright, I've got the chat up. Looks like we've got all the usual suspects in chat. So we'll get underway in a moment.
Yep.
So
looking good. Everything, all the stream information is fine.
So
for now,
you've put on the Patreon page.
Well, I haven't yet because of. Did you click the link or anything?
I didn't see it. Do you want to try again? We're so well organised.
Every time I log into this stuff, and every single time it asks me.
I don't think it popped up on my phone. Can you resend it? We're just trying to get the word out on the main Patreon page, and Tim's having trouble getting access to it.
We will leave that for now until the email comes through, because I hate this stuff so much. Like when...
I'll just make sure I didn't kill the notification or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just painful stuff. Anyway, we're here in Steve's place for once.
Yep.
Mostly because
here we go.
Felt like driving out this way this time.
Well, it took Tim 2 hours.
Yes, click on it.
Just that link there.
Yeah, nice.
I think I clicked it. All right, there we go. I definitely clicked it.
Sweet.
All right. So Tim's driven out this way. Sorry for people who are just sitting there waiting for us to get going. We will be underway in another minute or two. Tim's just got to notify everybody on the Patreon page. We'll be up and running in a second.
Did you post about this on here, by the way?
I just let people know. Yep.
Nice.
So.
Easy.
Yeah, hopefully it all works without any troubles. We are streaming off my mobile phone because it's faster and more reliable than my actual NBN, which is a bit embarrassing. But anyway, it is what it is. And if you have any questions or things you want us to discuss on this live stream, feel free to drop that in chat and we'll go over it. Tim and I have a couple of things we're going to talk about, but...
Yeah, let me just tweet it out as well.
Alright, Tim's almost done.
This is riveting viewing.
Yep. That's one of our better streams so far.
Well, we've had a lot more people join the Patreon since last time we did stream, because I was sick last time.
Yes,
I was sick for like a month, which was just wonderful. Wonderful time.
It feels like ages since we've done this because we missed last month and I did the Q&As all on my lonesome. But anyway, stream looks good. Well, that's good. Tim is getting a free ride on the Hub channel. Tim's just sitting back, putting his feet up.
Right, it's all working. It's all good.
All right. Tell us how you really feel about user benchmark. Well, that didn't take long.
Yeah.
I have wireless NBN, and it was really flaky when I first got it installed, but for about the last 6 to 12 months, it's been really reliable. It hasn't dropped out, nothing like that, but it does slow down.
It was pretty slow when we just tested.
Yeah, we just tested it then. It seemed pretpretty slow, so we thought, rather than risk, we'll just use my phone. My phone's always pretty well flat out, so yeah, we've USB tethered my phone to the stream PC, and
Aren't you know that they got rid of the unlimited plan on Telstra? And you can
I've got it for
change
2 years though, yeah. So in 2 years' time there'll be another plan, so it'll be right. Are we going to see the FX Dart game again now with Tim? Probably not. I'm seeing a few user benchmarks in here. We will. Yeah, we'll touch on that in a second.
Yeah, it seems like it's a hot topic at the moment for some reason.
Yeah.
Because apparently user benchmark is something people actually use.
Well, I didn't really know it existed. I mean, I must have seen it at some point when I was researching and looking for information on processors. I knew of GPU Boss. Have you heard of GPU Boss?
I've heard of that, yep.
Okay, GPU Boss I was aware of, which I have no idea if it's even the same thing. I really don't know. I've never really paid too much attention to it. But yeah, never ever looked at this user benchmark website before, not long enough to really know what it was or what it was called if anyone asked me about it. And then, what was it, 3 or 4 days ago, we started getting a lot of people asking us to make a video about it. And we didn't really have that much interest. I'd never really visited it. And then I was speaking with Steve from Gamers Nexus. He had pretty much the exact same opinion as us. But we've been getting loads and loads of requests over the last few days, so we thought we'd probably have some sort of conversation about it. Tim and I have been digging into it and having a bit of a look about it. And we'll do a separate video, just a casual chit-chat back and forth about it.
Yeah, like a Q&A, I think.
Yeah, like
Except
a Q&A.
with only one question.
Yeah, we'll do like a Q&A style thing after the live stream, and that'll be up on the channel maybe tonight, depends on how we go. But yeah, I've digged into a bit. It seems pretty crap, but well, it's a tough one to talk about because sites like that, while they're a bit of fun for users and whatnot, we take them with a grain of salt. Like users benchmarking and then collating all that data to produce anything meaningful, it's never going to do that. So we've always sort of thought that kind of thing it's kind of like going to the 3D Mark Hall of Fame and buying your computer based on what things score well. So you'd end up with like a 7980 XE or something. I don't know. But it's not something we've ever paid too much attention to or think it's worth looking into. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, there's people here commenting, it's the first thing that shows up when you search a processor versus processor
It's surprising how
search.
well it does rank, yeah.
But the way I've always thought of those sites is that, even with these changes that have happened and sort of made it all worse, it was never good to begin with. So if you're the sort of person that's just Googling that and you've used that as your main source of information, it's not like it's ever been good. So it's not like, this is a really useful piece of information that like loads of people were using. It was excellent. People were making great buying decisions based on that info. Suddenly, Intel's bought them out or something and changed it, and it's become crap and an Intel shill site. It's like, it's still giving you bad information. It's just giving you slightly different bad information than what it used to. Yeah. So just because it's, ranked highly on search, it's still going to fool all those people that are just interested in searching, and that's the first thing they click. And it's annoying that sort of site is so highly ranked in comparisons. You can understand why it is, because it's just heavy SEO stuff to sort of get it right up on the rankings. But it'd be great if it was a useful, legitimate, well-researched, well-compiled resource, but it never has been. And I'm a bit more familiar with it, and I've seen a lot of it. Every time I've been on there, I'm just like, this looks just so wrong. And this is before even like Johnny Hardware Unboxed and stuff. It's just like the results just looked miles off. Yep. And yeah, I think at least from what I've seen of not just that site, but other sites that attempt to do the same thing, like sort of just, computer generated comparisons of anything. Mm-hmm. It's all of them have exactly the same format and just look, to the eye, they just don't pass an eye test. They're just like, looks a bit weird and dodgy, and I've just personally never used them. I've just always thought they're crap.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I guess from where we're coming from, with tons of people asking us to do like I don't know, expose them or some sort of hit piece on userbenchmark.com. It's kind of a weird thing because it's driven by the users. So it's like, if you guys aren't happy with it, I guess don't use it. It's a pretty tough one. Like, there's not much, I don't think there's much we can do to influence what they do. Like, people are already upset. They've addressed people who are upset and said, tough luck. And I don't think there's much we can do about it. All we can do is sort of put more eyeballs towards what they're doing. So,
like, to be fair to them, they basically are doing exactly what their website says they're doing. They're taking user-generated results, compiling them, and because there are so many user-generated results they can access, they've got data for basically every CPU out there. And it's like, okay, you go to the website, that's what you're going to get. And, you know, sure, they've changed the weighting algorithm. The weighting algorithm's garbage to begin with. Review scores and weighting algorithms to try and come up with like a number that summarizes a product into just one number and makes it really easy to compare is such a bad way of comparing things.
Yeah.
I just, like, obviously we don't do review scores or weighted averages for we don't give a processor a score at the end. TechSpot editorial team does that for certain things we review, but
it's a bit like yesterday's video when I talked about the 9400F versus the 3600. The average graph at the end that I used for the cost per frame analysis, it is in some ways a bit misleading. So you have to discuss what those results mean. So it's an easy way to see how they sort of stack up, but then you have to delve into that a bit more and say, you know, there was no instance where the 3600 was anything but smooth as silk, like perfect frame rates. They may not have been as high, but the 1% lows, the frame time performance was always really good. And you couldn't say that about the 9400F. It struggled in a couple of titles. Battlefield 5 was obviously one of them. I think it was a bit down in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So just looking at it at, you know, an average across all those games can be misleading. And it's the same thing when you do it with applications, because some applications, sure, there might be, you know, single figure differences, but then in other ones it can be 50-60%. And just saying that, oh yeah, they're 9% difference on average, well, do you want to use Adobe Premiere where it's 50% faster? And if so, then taking that 9% figure is really misleading. For what they're doing, it is kind of difficult. I see the challenge they have. And I think that's just why people are so upset about the weighting system, because you're already doing something that's quite difficult. You're already generalizing quite heavily on things like desktop application performance and then gaming performance. So that's already a challenge. But then taking that challenge and making it even worse by just skewing the results massively by focusing on single core performance in 2019 is just bizarre. I totally get why people are upset, because it just makes no sense to do that. Even their quad-core metric is just silly. I don't think there should be that quad-core middle ground metric. I think it should just be... I don't even know if single-core or single-thread should really be a thing. I think it should just be outright performance they focus on. It might be okay to take that into account, but I think it should just be the multi-core thing. Like the fully unleashed processor, because...
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of applications still that only use a single thread. And I think, you know, Chrome is one that people use a lot.
But even that's so difficult, and this is the challenge we face with benchmarks. And doing accurate benchmarking, this isn't really something we can address. But when talking about general desktop usage and things like that, it's certainly something you can weigh in your conclusion. For example, you're not just using Chrome.
Yeah.
And what are you doing in Chrome? And for take example Premiere Warp Stabilizer. So that uses a single core. Still uses a single core?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an effect that takes quite some time. So do you finish your video and then go, I've got 4 minutes of footage that I need to warp stabilize. So you drag it in, drop it on there and say warp stabilize. It says 18 minutes. And then you're like, okay, 18 minutes. I'll just sit here and wait for 18 minutes. No, you alt tab and you start using your browser. You might make a thumbnail. You do all that kind of stuff. And that's where having better than, you know, your single core performance comes into play.
I mean, I think the weighting system they've used obviously is complete shit, but I think that at the same time you can't just completely discount like you
No.
you have to include some single core benchmarks in there along the way, so that, and at least split them up, because I always think it's so user dependent, as you're saying, on what exactly you're doing with your computer. You might be buying a PC and not gaming on it at all, so you don't care about the gaming results, which might be skewed by different things. So like a site like User Benchmark shouldn't have a weighted average at all. It should just be a list of different things in different areas. Like,
Sure.
you might have your desktop performance, and then you'd split that up into like your encoding benchmarks, rendering benchmarks, compiling benchmarks, single threaded, whatever. And you'd have like a whole bunch of different types of categories and give your performance summaries. Do the same with gaming, do like older games, newer games, that sort of thing. And just go through and have a whole bunch of summaries that you can look at. And then if you're a smart user who's, you're obviously, you're trying to do research. So I'm going to have the benefit of the doubt and say you're trying to be smart, you're doing your research, and you sort of know what you want. Like,
Yep.
you might know you're going to game and do video encoding. So then a site like User Benchmark could be really handy if the results were good to begin with.
Yep.
If you could then go and look and be like, okay, these 2 categories out of the 10 that they have available matter to me, and I can see that processor A is better than processor B in these 2 categories. And I don't care about the rest of this stuff because that's not what I'm doing. Because some of the comparisons are ridiculous, like a dual or quad core Intel CPU beating like a 32 core AMD Threadripper because its single core performance is better. And it's like, but you don't buy a Threadripper processor for good single core performance.
Yeah.
You buy it for rendering and encoding and stuff. So I've never liked the summary type stuff with any product category. It all depends on what you're doing with the product. I mean, maybe for something like a toaster, where a toaster toasts, that's it. It's got one task. You put your toast in, it comes out. How good does it do that job? Then you can give it a score. But if it's like a laptop or a desktop or anything that it has multiple use cases depending on what you want, you just can't give something a score or weighted average. It just doesn't work.
No, it generalizes something that's quite complex and
Yeah.
broad too much. So, yeah, I don't know if there's too much more. I think the biggest issue is the fact that they had this system in place and it was perfectly fine for first and second gen Ryzen. Then third gen Ryzen comes out, offers quite a substantial leap forward. You still get the added benefit of more cores and all that. And that's definitely giving AMD a massive advantage in benchmarks. I mean, I was pretty surprised how badly the 3600 decimated the 9400F. I was pretty surprised by that. That was pretty brutal beating that. And that's what they would have been seeing on the User Benchmark website. All those Intel CPUs would have been getting absolutely smoked by third gen Ryzen. I don't know why that's not okay. So they had to adjust the weighting system to make it seem...
I mean, their justification was something like, with all these high core count parts coming in, the multi-threaded benchmarks skewing the results too much. But
what are you using to get the multi-threaded benchmarks?
And the thing is that no one today is specifically developing single-threaded applications if they can help it. Like, sure, there's some tasks that you cannot avoid running single-thread just because of the nature of it.
Yeah.
But no one is coming out and going, I'm making my app to run on one core. Like, it just doesn't happen anymore. So as we've seen in games, we're getting this shift of people moving from, single-threaded games, couple of threads, maybe 4 threads, to now where suddenly a quad core is no longer the best option for gaming. And that's only going to continue. And, it's always difficult to sort of, or dicey to say, yeah, you want more cores for the future, because we saw with FX that by the time that eventuated, FX was still...
Well, that's
shit,
a very bad example.
But, there's just... It doesn't make sense to me that you would weight it back from multi-core. If anything, you should over time be weighting it more and more towards multi-core.
Yeah, that's very
because
obvious.
That's how applications are being developed. I think, we're seeing at the moment stuff like Premiere is not working super well above a certain amount of cores. But I would expect, based on seeing DaVinci Resolve, which apparently works very well with high core count
There's
CPUs.
still a benefit of having 16
Yeah.
cores, though.
Well, I'm saying like it works well with 16, but it might not work well with 32. I can only see in the future that Adobe will fix that and make it work better with 32.
Sure.
They're not going to make it worse and
No.
more single core dependent.
No, that's absolutely right. And even now, a quad core is going to get destroyed by 8 cores, 12 cores, 16 cores. I went over to their website just before the stream, and I made one interesting comparison between the Core i3 8350K, which is basically a Core i5 7600K with 2 megabytes extra L3 cache and a 5% increase in clock speed. So basically the same thing. And I compared that to the Ryzen 7 2700X. So Core i3 8350K versus Ryzen 7 2700X. Now, that is comparing a 4-core, 4-threaded processor to an 8-core, 16-thread processor. And they are saying that the 8350K is better in games and is a better desktop CPU. Did I note? I didn't note the margins. Hang on, let me just open the link up quickly. I didn't note what they actually, what they were claiming. But
Just click on the thing that popped up.
that one there?
No, the
The link
that.
here. Yep,
Yeah.
got it. Uh-oh. Come on, laptop, you can do it. So they are claiming that the Core i3 processor is 2% faster overall. They're saying that it is... They're saying it's 2% faster in gaming and 3% faster for desktop usage. So the desktop usage one is particularly hilarious. So they're saying for general computing desktop usage, the 8350K is 3% faster than the 2700X. So I thought, that's interesting. I just finished benchmarking the 7600K, which is a very similar CPU in terms of specifications, and I quickly had a look at how they compare. So just really quickly here, the Ryzen 7 processor is 200% faster for 7-zip decompression. It was 50% faster in Assassin's Creed Odyssey for average frame rates. It was 102% faster in Battlefield 5 when looking at 1% lows. 170% faster in Blender Open Data, 51% faster in the Division 2 when looking at the average frame rate, 51% faster for the 1% low, so this is obviously 1080p with an RTX 2080 Ti, 50% faster in Hitman 2, 53% faster in Total War 3 Kingdoms, 37% faster in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It was 6% slower in Far Cry, but they both averaged over 100 FPS and provided smooth gameplay, but it was slower in that game, so older games that obviously only use up to 4 cores, it could beat the Ryzen processor. The Ryzen processor was 100% faster in Premiere. It was similar, pretty much the same Cinebench 20 single core performance, but 148% faster for the multi-core test. So does that sound to you like the Ryzen processor was 2 to 3% slower overall? Like, it's just bizarre. And I also went and had a look at like a NANTech, had a look at their web browser test, their system test, and their numbers all come up very similar to mine. You're looking at anywhere from 50 to 200% faster for the Ryzen processor because it has twice as many cores and 4 times as many threads. That's right, isn't it? Yeah,
Yep.
That's actually,
Yep.
yeah. So there's a whole heap of comparisons that I've made like this. There's some that are even worse. So we'll talk about it later when we do a video dedicated to this. But I suppose, yeah, just to let you guys know, we are addressing this now because so many people want us to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say beyond it's just they've messed up the weighting system and that's really it. And you can
But again,
speculate.
it's not like it was good to begin with.
No, it's
So,
not. It's just, I can see why people are upset because it's poorly timed. Like, Ryzen looks too good, so we're going to dial it back, even though that weighting system was perfectly fine when Intel looked good against first and second gen. And it does make them look like Intel's definitely gone and given them some money to change their weighting system. I'm not saying that's what's happened, but it bloody well looks like it.
yeah, it's a bad look.
It's a bad look, and we know how Intel operates. And we know Intel would absolutely offer them money to change their weighting system. Like, would that surprise you?
No, wouldn't surprise me at all.
No, they would absolutely do that. I'd actually be surprised if they hadn't.
Yeah.
I honestly would be surprised if they hadn't.
But, yeah, I mean...
So, but I'm not accusing them of anything because we don't have evidence, and people accuse us of being paid to give AMD positive content all the time, so that's annoying. So I don't want to go accusing them of something without evidence, but it's a really bad look given the timing and what we'd expect from Intel. So, are you guys satisfied that we've covered that one enough?
Yep.
Seems like, yep, move on.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I find all that stuff interesting. I mean, I sort of, sometimes when I see our benchmarks, I sort of think like a lot of the focus is on, you know, heavy application usage and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we don't do a lot of we don't really focus in on a casual user's apps, which could be stuff like, you know, just using Chrome or using, you know, loading up Netflix or something.
Such a hard thing to benchmark. I've thought about it.
But at the same time, it's at the point of almost like with modern hardware of kind of in that diminishing returns zone. Like even using laptops, which are fairly slow, like when you're using Chrome, unless you're like doing a ridiculous amount of work on your laptop at the same time, Chrome performance is fine. Like it's not that, like I've got a laptop with a Core i5-8250U in it. It's like, it's a quad core CPU, but it's fairly low clocked.
Yep.
And I can open like multiple tabs, browse around, and it's honestly not that much slower than like a 9900K system for that.
A lot of the demanding stuff's accelerated. So...
Yeah, and it's like, you're in that point where like, sure, on a benchmark, it might show up that, you know, the 9900K is actually like 20 or 30% faster. But I'm probably internet limited using Chrome. Like, I'm not going to be performance limited. I'm limited by how quickly I can actually get the data from the web server, as opposed to how quickly my computer can process that data. So I always just think with those sort of apps, it's like, are you really going to notice? And I think people are seeing that with phones as well. Like, phones are really slow, like really, really slow. But there's nothing that I need to upgrade my phone for. It feels fast. It works fine. Whereas like video rendering, the difference between like a 30-minute and a 15-minute render can be massive for the work that I do every single day.
Yeah,
or for gaming.
Exactly.
Like it's a big difference for those tasks, but it might give the same margins for web browsing, but you're talking about, you know, a 1 millisecond load compared to a 0.7 millisecond load.
Yeah, it's irrelevant.
Like, all right, whatever, doesn't matter.
We're not trying to make quad cores core heavy processors look better than what they are, but we're just trying to show where the meaningful gains are.
Yeah.
And it's not like if they were slower in those areas, then we'd absolutely be doing you a disservice by overlooking them. But if it's like, it's just, well, there's basically no difference there, so...
Yeah. And the whole sort of snappiness argument that you hear sometimes, like, Intel CPUs are snappier than AMD, and it's like, are they though?
Well, there's a question in the Q&A for both... it was asked twice. We had it for the Patreon section and the main channel section. And it's a tough one because it's somewhat of a relevant point because we know that the Intel CPUs do have lower latency.
Yeah.
And we know they're clocked higher. So it's very likely that something like the 7700K running at 5 gigahertz did have lower latency than a first-gen Ryzen part, especially when they were released. Whether you'll notice that and how often you'll notice it, and it's just another metric, like if you click something in Chrome and it happens nanoseconds faster, is that going to offset completing a rendering task minutes earlier? So it's just one of those things. And I used to have this argument with Brian from Techier City because when I moved to the 1800X for encoding and he had the 8700K, and we'd be editing and he swore that the Intel processor, because of its lower latency and higher clock speed, was better for editing. Maybe it was side by side. I actually set up a side by side comparison. It was like, it's so close, it's difficult to tell. But then when you finish your video and want to render it out, the Ryzen processor was many minutes faster for like a 15-minute video.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are you going to notice at the end of the day? Saving, 5 minutes rendering something out, or milliseconds and maybe even nanoseconds, I don't know.
Yeah,
so,
pretty much.
But no one ever tested it either. It was actually, that could have been an interesting thing for you to do with your input lag and latency sort of testing.
Yeah. Again, that stuff is
painful.
It's not necessarily painful. It's very, when you're doing input latency testing, it's very difficult to isolate exactly what you're testing, because for all I know, like, and again, this might be an advantage, but for all I know, like, you plug in a mouse on an Intel CPU and versus an AMD CPU, the AMD CPU is not actually slow at processing anything. It's just slightly slower at taking mouse inputs. And it's like, okay, what if I switched out the mouse and then suddenly it can handle a different mouse better? Like,
and was it the USB implementation on that motherboard?
Exactly.
It's like so difficult.
That stuff sounds dumb. Like, surely all mice have the same latency or would work the same, but you can't isolate it with input latency testing, so you just don't know.
It's a tough one as well because it can be so much like the chipset driver or the power profile you're using when testing.
To be honest, the thing that will give you the biggest upgrade over anything in your entire system for input latency is getting a high refresh monitor. If you're using a 60 hertz monitor, you have a gigantic cap on your input latency. And if you jump to 144 hertz, you'll be like at least doubling how quick you can get inputs in.
Yeah, and how many people edit videos on a professional grade 60 hertz panel?
Yeah.
Pretty well everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, oh, how snappy that stuff happens. It's like, yeah, upgrade to a high refresh monitor. You don't even have to do anything. Like, sure, your GPU will have to work like 1% faster to generate 144 FPS instead of 60. Yeah. But the snappiness improvement is like massive.
Codgerface says snappiness. Jardeth has entered the chat, and then Jared jumps in. I pioneered the snappiness benchmarks. Yeah, it's a bit of a silly one. I mean, it's just difficult to test accurately.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's just there's so many easy tweaks you can do to change it as opposed to changing your CPU, like changing your monitor or.
Yeah, look, if you're an absolute elite gamer and need the best, I would probably get a highly clocked Intel CPU. But if you're someone who cares more about whether that click when they were editing their video, how many milliseconds that took, opposed to actually then encoding the video or doing something meaningful that requires a lot of CPU resources, that's where you're really going to notice the difference. And so that comes back to why we do the benchmarks the way we do them. But I often, and I thought it last night when I was concluding that video, the 9400F versus the 3600, I thought, are we being AMD biased? Like, are we favoring AMD? I often think that because especially a lot of the CPU content lately, like the 7600K versus the Ryzen 5 1600, I was super impressed with how the 1600s aged, and I was really impressed with that. And we were pretty wrapped with the Navi GPUs. I think most people were. But I constantly go back, look, and basically the way if you're wondering how I come to the conclusions I come to when I'm wrapping my videos up or why I say the things I say, is the way it works is I do all the benchmarking first. I don't write a word, mind you. I don't script anything until I've done all the benchmarking. I've then put all that data into Excel. I've then exported all the graphs. I've then created cost per frame, how they compare overall, and then looked at every single graph. I usually actually write that section first, the graph section, and go over all of it, and then I start to formulate my conclusion based on those findings. And it's never just like, this is what I think, or these are my thoughts. It's like, it's based on this information. So it's imperative that the results and the testing's accurate, because that's what I'm basing my whole conclusion on.
Yep.
And then I will factor in other things like platform support, what we've seen in the past or what we expect to see in the future. And that, my sort of weighting system, if you will, it's less on that, more on the numbers, but I just take that into account. So,
yeah, I think pretty similar to what I do. I mean, I don't write the middle of my review first. I write it from start to finish in line. But I have exactly like you, I have all the testing done. And usually just before I go into review, I just like make some notes on like things I want to test just in case I forget to do some of it. And sometimes I'll put in like an expectation of just sort of like what I think generally people are expecting something will be like. And then to sort of say whether, something is disappointed or surprised. Because I think that's, at least for me, I find that sort of stuff interesting. Like, if a lot of people think ray tracing, for example, is going to be crap, and it turns out that it's not amazing, but it's at least better than expected, then I think that's
Yeah, you focus on
Interesting
relevant
to know.
points as well.
But like with you as well, saying, are we too AMD biased? I was thinking that during the whole ray tracing thing, with covering NVIDIA and covering ray tracing after ray tracing and DLSS and NVIDIA calling me up and having a grill at me and all that stuff. You sort of think, oh, was I being too harsh? And then every time I go back, I'm like, absolutely not.
I often go back and reevaluate as well and just make sure that
Yeah.
there wasn't,
Yeah, like I relooked at DLSS to cover radio and image sharpening. And I'm like, this is still unimpressive.
Yep. No, I think it's important to keep doing that, but I don't think we have been too biased one way or the other. I think it's pretty well driven by the facts and figures.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, if there's a whole bunch of people that come up with like a compelling use case for something that we haven't considered, that's usually when like something might change the opinion. Someone you can't think of everything when you do a review. So sometimes someone thinks of something and they're like, okay, you guys mentioned all these points where it sucks, but actually I've got this really good use case for this technology or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, that makes sense. And you sort of think about it in a different way. But
yeah, like if tons of our audience and we saw a massive upward trend in people that stream while gaming, then we would start to incorporate that into our benchmarks. But I know a lot of people do request it, but we've done a few polls and it's usually like maybe 10% of people are interested in that. So until that sort of starts creeping up towards 50%, we would start including that in our benchmarks and making that a factor.
yeah, and like the stream while benchmarking is interesting to me because a lot of the time I honestly don't think it matters at all how good your stream quality is, because sure, it's nice if you could get a really crisp looking game footage and everything from your setup. Like that would be amazing. But if you're actually just not good at streaming and you're just either like a terrible gamer or you're just not interesting or whatever, that is way more important than having good stream quality. And if you're like you want to become a streamer, the first thing you should be interested in is becoming good at streaming before being interested in how good your stream quality is.
Yeah, I mean...
So, like, by the time that you actually get good,
Sure.
you should be using a completely different setup that's, like, highly optimized.
Sure. I mean, I don't disagree with you. If for whatever reason you just want to record high quality footage, you want to capture your game footage and you want it to be high quality, then that's a completely different thing. But I get what you're saying. It's kind of like if you want to be a good YouTuber, getting good at your presentation, having good quality audio is more important than having a red camera.
Yeah, so I just think, like, if you're in that category of streamers, just use whatever you have. Like, in the GPU accelerated encoding stuff that's available, sure, it's not as good as CPU encoding, but it's not bad.
No,
like,
but
it works fine,
if you've
right?
got $2,000 to spend and you want to get a computer
of course.
stream,
But
it's
I just
important to
think
know
that, if you're sort of just a regular person, it shouldn't be, at least to me, any significant buying factor at all.
Yeah.
Like, buy a PC that you are going to enjoy using for your gaming. And sure, for some people, getting really good stream quality might be what you're interested in.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we don't include it in our day one benchmarks.
Yeah.
And
But it's just, focus on the other stuff first before sort of going all out on... Yeah, as you say, it's the same as someone buying like a red camera to use on YouTube, for YouTube when you have absolutely no idea how to make YouTube videos.
yeah,
It's
but
like,
I mean,
it's not gonna improve it.
if everyone was looking at buying a red camera and you were
Yeah.
doing camera reviews, then you would have to cover it. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if everyone was looking, or a good portion of our audience was interested in streaming and wanted to know what the best value streaming option was, then that was something we would have to be testing, regardless of
Yeah.
whether they need it or not. But yeah, I know what you're saying as well. What's going on in chat? I haven't really
It was probably different a while ago, though, before we had sort of decent GPU accelerated encoding and slow CPUs and stuff. Like, it would have been a lot more difficult to do that. But these days, I mean,
Well, ultimately,
bit of a much of them. And like,
I'm no expert on streaming, but ultimately, I believe if you want to stream to the best quality possible and not have frame drops or any issues, you just have a dedicated stream PC.
yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't have to be a super heavy, like, it doesn't have to be a 3900X, for example. I don't know what the minimum requirement is for a dedicated streaming PC to be able to record, like...
Well, just based on our OBS usage on these sort of systems with the 20. So right now we're not doing any gaming or anything, and I believe I'm using X264. I've done it on my PC at home. I do medium for our streams at 6 megabit, and it uses like barely half the CPU to do it.
Yeah, so instead
So
of
it's like you could do slow, which is generally the slowest you would want to go.
so instead of trying to buy a 3900X, you're probably better off just building two Ryzen 5 2600 systems.
Yeah.
And game on one, stream on the other.
Yeah.
And that would be better than having a 9900K or a 3900X.
Yeah, and there's always going to be
guess.
complications with running two pieces of software at the same time
On the one
system.
PC, you always have bottlenecks.
Yeah, I
so-
mean, like, I was really into it at one point, looking heavily into encoding, like all the technologies for encoding and stuff. But I realized just doing like even the quality comparisons on our YouTube channel, people just cannot tell the difference. Like you could show the clearest side by side image you've ever gotten of something, and people would just be like, I could not tell. I looked at these two things for like 5 minutes, and I just couldn't tell.
Well, 40% of them are watching it on their mobile phone.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, editing the quality videos on my PC, I've got a 4K monitor. Every time I mention there's a difference, I can see it quite easily. So I always try and make sure that happens. But obviously, after you encode it, I obviously capture the footage at a much higher bit rate than I encoded in. And then YouTube will kill a lot of that. And then people don't watch it at 4K, so that kills even more of that. And then eventually you get to the point where you just you can't really tell.
Yeah.
And even on something like Twitch, which is even worse than YouTube for like this stuff, then
I think the whole streaming thing, and it's the reason why we don't cover it, has just been blown out of proportion. I think, first of all, not enough people do it, and then the degree to which you need hardware support to do it, I don't know. I just think it's been blown out of proportion, basically. I just don't think, there's enough people doing it, and the people that are doing it, like you say, do they really need super high
That
quality?
said, if you're like a hardcore streamer, then go watch those YouTubers that really get in depth on streaming stuff and build yourself a proper like dedicated setup or a high performance setup so you can do it like really well.
Yeah, I don't know how many people have looked into it, but it'd be really interesting to see building a new dedicated PC for streaming, what it needs to be if it's not gaming. It's just a dedicated stream box. Is it like get yourself $150 or they're even cheaper now, like a Ryzen 5 2600, 16 gigs of RAM, basic B450 motherboard. Yeah, so you could probably buy a secondhand complete system for like less than 500 US.
Here's a good question from Jared on a completely different
From
note.
Jared, are you sure it's the right user?
Yeah.
Good question from Jared.
I know, it's crazy, right? Speaking of phone viewers, have you ever considered going to 21:9 aspect ratio YouTube videos? I've been asked a few times to swap. Doesn't really seem worthwhile yet, but mobile viewers are a high percentage now.
I think you've answered this before, haven't you?
I'm not sure I ever have. I don't think so, but I'll give you my opinion now.
I thought your answer was no because not enough. Anyway, no, go give me your opinion.
In my opinion, it doesn't matter how many mobile viewers ever watch our videos. I'm never switching to 21:9. And the reason for that is not because it fills a phone screen better. It's actually worse for showing products.
Yeah.
A product doesn't fit as well into a 21:9 aspect ratio frame than a 16:9 frame.
What if it's What if it's an ultra wide monitor?
Well, that could be right for an ultra wide monitor. But if you just think about the stuff we cover, they are not long, thin rectangles. So when you try and fit like a motherboard or a CPU into a long, thin rectangle
turn
frame,
the motherboard sideways. What about a graphics card?
like a graphics card, maybe.
So,
But everything else, like a motherboard isn't going to fit well. Monitors don't fit well. You need even tighter aspect ratio than 16:9 to cover a monitor. So when you cut all that vertical height out, what you just, especially for graphs, imagine how bad graphs would be if you
graphs
had
would be terrible.
fewer, like less vertical height.
The bars would just be like.
Yeah, I know. It's just
You could have two graphs side by side.
you could, but I don't like doing that very much.
No, I don't know why you'd want
So,
to.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of the reason. Like, I could understand if you're like MKBHD, whatever his
that's
name
it.
is. That guy, he does good quality phone content. He
That
switched.
guy.
He switched to 2:1 aspect ratio, which isn't as aggressive as 21:9, but a lot of phones are 2:1, and it makes sense because you're reviewing phones, and like a lot of his shots and stuff work well for that aspect ratio, but they just wouldn't work for us at all. So I'm never I might switch to 60 FPS at some point, but 21.9 is not happening.
Well, you've heard it from Tim. That's what's happening on that one.
Yeah. I kind of you probably don't even know where the setting is to change that.
Is there a setting? On the camera or on YouTube? Or on Premiere?
On Premiere.
I think I can probably work it out in Premiere. Jeez, I'm not that bad. Anyway, moving right along. What else are you going to talk about, Tim? Tell us another story.
Will capping my FPS give me better latency in games or worse? Interesting question. Depends whether you have a FreeSync monitor or not. If you do have a FreeSync monitor, there can be an advantage to capping to within the frame rate limit of your monitor versus VSync on above. VSync off will always give you the best latency, regardless of whether you have, a FreeSync monitor or whatever. You just go well above the frame rate limit.
Unless it's Metro.
Yeah, so Metro has bad input lag for like mouse and stuff. But yeah, if you run VSync off, you always get the frames as soon as possible. And if you run at a super high frame rate, your input latency will get reduced. That's as simple as it gets. The problem is you get massive tearing, which can annoy people.
Can get massive tearing.
You can. It depends how sensitive you are. Whereas with
some games seem to do it way worse than others, though.
That's true.
So
especially high motion games with FreeSync. Like with a FreeSync monitor and you don't want tearing, so you're a VSync on gamer. If you use fast sync or whatever, you can get slightly better input latency just by capping under the frame rate limit of your monitor, because that has no latency because your GPU is in sync with your monitor. So sometimes when you push it above and you start like trying to buffer it so that you get a new frame, but it's still waiting in a buffer to go out next time. Yeah, it's from a lot of people who are in the monitor scene that test like FreeSync on or off. If you want the best image quality and latency, you want to cap one frame below the monitor's maximum. So 143 FPS will give you the best latency on a FreeSync monitor, unless you want to game VSync off and just run at 500 FPS or whatever.
I'm a VSync off gamer.
Yeah. You have a 60 FPS, 60 hertz monitor though, don't you? So you want to be VSync off to begin
on the editing system, yeah. But I'm mostly, because I'm lazy, play on that. So, because I can't be bothered moving to my gaming PC that's just there. It's all the way over there.
Yeah, it's just moving. It's difficult,
Yeah, right.
It's just don't have chairs with wheels on them or anything. It just doesn't exist.
I'm actually usually benchmarking on it.
Yeah, same as Jason, cap at 143. And to be honest, once you go above like 40 FPS, you gain like 200 FPS. You're talking about a difference between like 4 and like 2 milliseconds. So it's not that much. I'm sure you can be fine.
Yeah,
at that sort of limit.
I'll talk about X570 motherboards briefly.
Cool.
Because I've decided after.
I can see the pile over there.
Yeah, that's all X570s, and that's half of them. So, yeah, I hope that doesn't fall over. Anyway, after I did a behind the scenes video, asked you guys if I should use the 3900X to look at the X570 boards. You guys thought, don't bother waiting for the 16 core part. So I've gone ahead and started testing the flagship boards first. I'm testing them with the 3900X at 4.3 gigahertz with 1.4 volts as an extreme stress test. And then I'm testing the boards just default BIOS loaded, XMP enabled, and then in Ryzen Master enabling PBO plus Auto OC, which we know doesn't do a whole lot. But
it's like an auto type overclock.
Just an auto overclock, which is pretty much what everybody's going to do.
Yep.
So it's up to the boards, whatever shape the current latest BIOS is in, how well it handles auto voltages and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I've done those 2 tests, and I've tested the MSI Godlike, the Gigabyte Extreme, the Aorus Extreme, the Asus Hero, and the ASRock Taichi. So that'll be the first comparison, and that'll be sort of the flagship ones. There is is it the Aqua from ASRock? we're getting one of
Yeah.
those, but it's a special limited edition thing. We're getting like an engraved hardware unbox version. It's coming
Oh,
later.
that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's coming like in 4 weeks or something, so that won't be in time. And then Asus has the Formula, which is their $700 US board, but it has the same VRM, but you can liquid cool it. But they haven't sent that, and I asked them if they wanted it included. They didn't. Anyway, I've been going back and forth with Asus because the Godlike and the Extreme are running around 10 degrees cooler than the Hero. And Asus are adamant that that shouldn't happen. And I watched Buildzoid's breakdown on those leaked slides, or the slides from Asus.
Was it an hour-long video?
No, it was way over an hour. Way over an hour. And
I was
he's...
going to say, an hour's pretty short for builds.
Yeah, he seemed to think that the Extreme and the Hero should be very similar in temperature, which is what Asus are telling me, but it's definitely not what I'm seeing. And I've retested 3 times now, and I've used 8 K-type thermocouples. I've checked everywhere.
Do they have the same VRM design?
No, completely different. And Gigabyte has way better heat sinks.
So why does Buildzoid think that they should have the same heat output?
Uh,
the heatsink would make a difference.
No, well, okay, so the Extreme has a 14-phase V-Core VRM, and I believe it's 60 amp power stages. The Asus Hero has an 8-phase VRM, but it has 16 stages, and I think there's 70 amp stages.
Right.
So
Yep.
it has
Yep.
a higher capacity.
Yep.
But it has like a heat reservoir type heatsink, and this is a passive test that I'm doing. But anyway,
Well, the heatsink makes a big difference.
yes.
Like, if you take the heatsink off, then they might perform the same. But if you put a better heatsink on, the temperature's going to be lower with a probe in. Like,
Well,
it's
I've
gonna
been
be lower.
speaking with Steve from Gamers Nexus, because when he gets back from LTX, they will be doing the same testing I'm doing. So I've sent him my figures. He's looked over them. He says, well, it makes sense to him. But anyway, I've gone back. I've triple tested everything. So I'm very confident in what I found. But Asus...
The data's the data. It doesn't lie, right?
So I've sent the numbers to Asus. They're seriously not happy with my findings, and they're really pushing me to change things. And yeah. So anyway, that video will probably be out within the next week, I'm hoping. So I've done all the testing. I'm just going over, checking voltages and things like that again.
Has Asus got these boards in and tested them themselves to know that it's different, or are they just guessing?
Oh, the Gigabyte board and that.
Yeah, because if they say the 2 boards perform the same, have they actually got the other board and tested it?
Well, that was Buildzoid who said that.
Yeah.
Asus are saying their board is like 5 degrees cooler than the Extreme, and they've tested it at their HQ. Except I don't trust their testing or how they've configured the boards.
Well, if they leave it on auto voltage, they might be they might have
Who
just
knows?
tweaked their auto voltage to run really, really low. Which
Well,
will give you that
their
difference.
auto voltage is slightly higher than Gigabyte's using PBO with Auto OC. So that in the auto test, but the margins are much the same once you put in 1.4 volt. And I've
I
adjusted
guess,
like load line calibrate. Like, so the Asus board doesn't need any adjustment to LLC. It runs at 1.4 pretty much on the dot. But the Gigabyte board needs the LLC set to turbo, or it runs like 200 millivolts under.
Yep.
So
Fairly standard. Yep.
So anyway, that video is coming up soon. It should be pretty interesting. It's just the flagship boards, which is probably less interesting. I mean, spoiler alert, they all run the 12-core part with way too much voltage really, really easily. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter too much. But I'm really, really keen. The next phase 2 will be the cheapest X570 model from the big 4. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all going pretty well. I've got... what does it look like there? I've probably got about 2 dozen X570 motherboards. So, and it takes a lot of time to test one. But yeah, so that's pretty much what one of my test systems will be doing for the next few
Yeah,
weeks.
I mean the whole Asus VRM stuff. I mean, there was obviously the Gamers Nexus video where they got the Asus guy in to explain why they went with their VRM design and all that sort of thing. And to me, it always just seems like it's just cost cutting.
It's definitely cost cutting.
Like you say, they might think in their office that these 2 boards have the same thing, but then they go and put a cheaper cooler on, so it performs worse. It's like, it doesn't matter how well you design your VRM if you then go and choke it with a weaker cooler than your competitors. You might think you've designed the best VRM ever, and then you go put a crap cooler on it, and it's like, well, why bother? You may as well just have dumbed down your VRM a bit because you can't be bothered putting the same level of cooling on as your competitors.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely cost saving, but I mean, the thing is, it's impossible for anyone. It's impossible for Buildzoid, DeBauer, Steve from Gamers Nexus. It's absolutely impossible for anyone to prove it one way or the other.
Yeah, and they're never going to say it is.
But there's no way you can do it, because the only way it can be done is if you create the exact same motherboard with the exact same PCB design, but one has doublers and one doesn't, which is what ASUS have gone and done and shown in their demonstrations. But you're taking ASUS at their word, and then Gigabyte can't go and debunk it by making the Extreme with and without doublers but the same amount of power stages, because then we're taking Gigabyte at their word. So unless Buildzoid can create his own motherboard and have one with doublers and one without, know that everything else is exactly the same. But what we do know is, I've tested this now on their Z390 boards. I've tested... Well, the X399 was actually pretty good, but I've tested a lot of the Z390 stuff, and it's exactly the same. They claim it's better, but then when you do the thermal testing, it's not.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those situations where, and we talked a little bit about this at Computex. I'm not going to go in that whole discussion again, but like, the data's the data. What comes out of your testing tools is what it is. So if it doesn't matter what ASUS claims their design is better, or it doesn't matter whether, you know, putting doublers on is theoretically better, which one's in theory is the best design. All that matters is what does it do in practice. So if ASUS can claim as much as they like that their design is better, but if you can do equivalent overclocking on all these boards, all the processors run exactly the same, which tends to be the case because they're well over designed. So all the CPUs have the same capabilities. The thing you're left with is the thermals. Which one performs the coolest is the best. And it might be all well and good that it has the best ripple or the best blah, blah, blah. They could go on forever about the theoretical performance. But if you can't use the theoretically better design to actually get an edge over any other design, it's meaningless.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, with the flagship boards, it's meaningless anyway, because they all can easily handle these processors with way too much voltage. More voltage than you should definitely use them with.
Yeah, and then it just becomes down to price and
additional features, BIOS. Yeah. Joey the Saint said, Steve, remember Buildzoid said ASUS was using an engineering sample 16-core. It doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter what they were using. Their testing was garbage, and it's marketing benchmarks. So
yeah, and that's it. You can never trust these companies because they have an incentive to tell you that whatever they've done is the best.
Yeah.
Like, they're not going to have their engineers come out and say, yeah, we had a directive from, you know, the project manager who said that, you know, we want to not include doublers on our motherboards now, which is going to save us, you know, thousands of dollars over this product line. So, you know, guys, we've actually made a slightly worse design, and we're cheaping out. We've actually priced the boards the same, though. So, I don't know. Like, that doesn't sound good. Like, they can't go out and say that.
No,
so
and
they're not going to say it.
I think they wanted to rig the game a bit by changing the marketing terminology, and because initially they just called it a 16-phase when it was really So where I pulled them up and there was all that big drama and everyone was saying I was definitely wrong was when I said that their Hero Z390 motherboard was a 4-phase board. It was a fat 4-phase, not an 8-phase. And there was all that drama and controversy. It turns out, it is just a 4-phase, even though all their US marketing materials said it was an 8-phase VRM.
Yeah.
Then they had to pull all that information, and then they changed it to a, what do they call it now? A Twin 8 or something stupid like that. I don't know what their marketing terminology is now. But they're still trying to pass it off as an 8-phase VRM. Or
There's teamed or something?
I can't remember. They've got a few different terms for it now. But anyway, so yeah, the flagship X570 testing, it's sort of interesting. Like I said, they'll all run the 16-core part easily. So no matter what slides you've seen from ASUS saying otherwise, all of them run really cool and have no problems with excessive voltage on the 12-core part. So the 16-core part will be no problems at all. As for the mid-range and lower end X570 boards, well, I'll start testing them this week, and that'll be interesting.
The interesting thing to me will be not necessarily X570 for this generation, but for the next gen. Because, right now, we've got these nice 16 core parts coming up that, we know based on what we've seen already that there's not very much overclocking headroom in these chips. They basically run as good as they can do straight out of the box. Like, there's a little bit you can get, but they're not massive overclockers.
No.
That's mostly because, TSMC's 7nm isn't really allowing these chips to run higher than like 4.2, 4.3 gigahertz on all the cores.
Yeah, it's irrelevant anyway.
The question is, what happens when, let's say, 7nm plus comes along, and there's no real efficiency gain there, but it can clock higher, like it's a 14nm plus sort of thing. That's going to mean higher power consumption. And what if there's like a fair bit more overclocking headroom in these chips because, they want to keep within the same TDP limit. So
well,
they clock it a little bit higher, or they give a bit more overclocking headroom or something like that. Then how do these boards perform?
Well, there won't be more overclocking headroom because if they can clock to, say, 5 gigahertz, most of the parts will do 5 gigahertz out of the box because AMD and Intel are no longer giving up frequency headroom.
Yeah, so I guess
they're not going,
the question would still be like,
sure,
say the 16 core out of the box, it's 105 watt part, but it might use 160, 170 watts.
Yeah.
What does the next gen do? Does it do over 200 watts if you have a good cooler and motherboard? It's like, it'll be interesting to see whether these boards can...
Yeah, I mean, that's
what they'll do with
that's
that
impossible
sort
to
of
say. There's that much headroom, though, especially in the mid-range to higher-end boards, that I don't think it'll matter.
Well, I think that's why they've designed them that way, though, is that they sort of know, well, AMD's got a 16-core part now. We've still got to use these boards with this socket for one more generation.
Yeah.
Who knows what they're going to do with that gen?
Like the Gigabyte Extreme, you could quite literally strap two 3900Xs onto that thing, and that VRM would power both of them with PBO Auto OCN80. That's how ridiculous the headroom is on it. But yeah, no, we're not expecting much or any improvement in clock speeds with Gen 3, or Zen 3 rather.
No, I wouldn't be expecting too much either.
You're just sort of saying...
I'm just speculating
what if...
If they could get crazy clock speed gains, which they won't.
Buildzoid nailed. Never trust marketing or competitors benchmarking. Oh, yeah.
That's pretty much always the case with any of these things.
Yeah,
never trust the slides.
No.
Never.
It's funny to look at them and have a bit of a laugh.
Oh, it's especially funny after the actual data comes. Like, every launch, there's always, you get, even AMD now, they're showing, like, for their gaming benchmarks, they'll show, like, 20 games on their, like, slides. And it's right there. And then you get to testing it, and they've still found 20 games that paint them in the best picture. They're just showing you more of them now. So it looks like it's less.
And then they finally come down at 1080p, but they're like, whoopsie, we didn't use an RTX 2080 Ti, we just used an RTX 2080.
Yeah.
And it's a bog stock model, which it's like...
Like the anti-lag stuff, they test at 4K, and it's like, no, it's not how you test input lag. So, same sort of thing.
Exactly. Zen 3 is rumoured to have 4 threads, assuming you mean per core. Is that even possible? It's definitely possible. I don't know if they'd go that wide, though.
But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they'd... Yeah, not sure. I'd be surprised.
Tim, enjoyed your Asus PG35VQ review, much better than the others. Oh, thanks. I think some of the other reviews were actually pretty good as well.
Yeah.
Any word on the Acer and AOpen variants of the high-end monitors? So the Acer X35, I will be getting one of those in the next couple of weeks. That's launched locally in Australia for like some ridiculous price. It's like
10 grand.
It's like $4,000 or something, which is just blows my mind how they could charge that much. The AOpen, I wasn't aware that there was an AOpen version. I know there's an AOC version of it. AOpen, I think,
AOpen doesn't exist anymore. To my knowledge.
So I'm assuming you mean the AOC variant. Yeah, hopefully I'll get that. AOC tends to be a bit shaky with some of their launches, just depends. But the next monitor I'll be launching an entirely new test suite. So many more benchmarks, much better data, all sorts of new testing, more graphs. It's going to be good. So that'll be good to do with the X35 and some of the other stuff that's coming out. So
he did mean AOC. Very good.
So yeah, I'm excited to do that. One of our Patreon members has been helping me design a automated testing tool for response times and stuff. So we'll be going from testing like, I think I'm doing at the moment it's like an average of 20 points. It'll be up to 110 with the new testing.
That'll be cool.
The data's looking really good, so I'm excited.
Awesome.
They'll do more stuff. Give you guys better stuff.
We always want more benchmarks.
Yeah, that's right.
So that'll be really good. You've got plenty of monitors laying around as well to
yes, I'm slowly going through and retesting them all.
Okay.
Redoing some of the profiles for the monitors that had broken profiles that we offer, the ICC stuff. And yeah, there's just, we always get requests for certain tests, but it takes a lot of time to develop the sort of the right tests, because especially with a lot of this stuff, we're kind of like with CPU and benchmarking, it's kind of like there's a lot of benchmarks. You can just pick one off the shelf and go. Whereas like testing some stuff with monitors is kind of, there's not that many people doing it, so you kind of just have to make your own way and sort of
it's a lot harder.
Tools to do it.
Yep.
It's like people always talk about like VA panels having bad dark level smearing. So when it's like shadows will have a lot of like motion blur and stuff, and people always, you're seeing every single one of my VA monitors, it's like, oh, it's VA, I hate it. It's like VA's crap, and it's like I use VA monitors all the time, they're fine. But it's like now I have the data to show people exactly how bad they are in those metrics.
Yeah,
it's
but
not as bad as people say.
Your testing's flawed, and you need to reevaluate because you've done it wrong. I always love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're getting pretty close to the end of this stream.
We're going for an hour and 6 minutes. No frames dropped since the start. It's been rock
4G
solid.
for the win.
Yep.
But yeah, if you do have any questions or anything like that, smash them into the chat now, because we're probably going to wrap this up in a few minutes. We've got to do Q&A. Well, we're going to do Q&A part 1 and 2, and that's from the community tab on YouTube. Then we'll have part 3, which will be the Patreon version. And we have a million questions from you guys already in the Q&A section. So some of them, I've skipped some of them because people were asking Zen 2 stuff, like, do we think the 3900X will match the 900K in gaming or whatever? So I've skipped those, obviously, because, well, they've been addressed now. So Codjafay says, Hub, can you do a state of the Ryzen 3000 summary regarding motherboards and memory? Meaning I've suggested the 3600 plus B450 Tomahawk / Carbon to mates. Yeah, we can do that. It's kind of a tough one though. It's kind of like doing like QVL testing for them, because I've flashed the Tomahawk to the beta BIOS and I've tested all the CPUs on it and I've had no trouble whatsoever. Like, no issues. I had some weird I had no troubles. The BIOS cycling thing was on ASRock. I had no problems at all with the MSI board, and people are just telling me they've got nothing but problems. And I think it's probably just due to what you usually see when this stuff's rushed out, just not enough testing. So I think it's probably mostly memory compatibility issues, since all the 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs worked perfectly fine for me. So I think the booting problems and other weird gremlins people are seeing, it's probably because of memory support. And then I don't know how people are, like, all these people that complain about certain things, like, is it a fresh install of Windows? Have they installed the chipset driver? Is Ryzen balanced power plan enabled? Like, I don't know whether they've just come from an old Intel system, taken their boot drive out, stuck it in the Ryzen system, and then said they've got all these problems. So the Tomahawk's been perfectly fine for me. So was the Carbon Pro. But I've only tested like CL14 FlareX memory. I haven't tested a whole heap of different memory modules, so there could be problems there. And that's just, it's a hard one to do, because I could test 6 different modules and say they all work fine, but that doesn't help the people who are having problems. So I mean, there's definitely issues. Like, there's definitely bugs, but it's like early.
It's always the way.
It's early adopted teething pains. Like, we're using beta BIOSes.
We don't get as many of these issues on Intel. Intel do seem to be able to do this sort of testing a little bit better than AMD.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
In that their launches tend to be smoother.
Kind of. Like, I mean, X99 was pretty bad. Like there was, well, some of the boards never got fixed. There was like USB problems. I had an Asus and an ASRock board, and both of them, you'd just be using the computer and they would just drop USB. And the only way to get them back was reset. And that was a bug that plagued that platform on a lot of motherboards for its entire life. And there were other problems. I mean, if you guys drop them in the chat if you remember what they were, I can't remember. But there was multiple problems with X99. So Intel does still have them, but yet AMD repeatedly has them. And that's why when AMD decided that they were going to launch, well, pretty much all the third gen parts, or they were going to send out multiple CPUs to reviewers along with Navi, I kind of reminded them of their history and their inability to execute on these launches without massive graphics card driver problems, massive motherboard BIOS problems. And yeah, anyway, they still went and did it. And so basically, I like the idea, and yes, I think I will do it, but I think I will wait till maybe, I don't know, what would be a reasonable amount of time to wait to sort of let all the motherboard manufacturers catch up. I know it's kind of unacceptable that it happens at launch, but at the same time, you've got to be somewhat reasonable. Like,
I think 3 months is fine.
Within 3 months, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think in 3 months, we should probably do an overview of where things are at.
Especially because it's getting, at that stage, it's getting pretty close to the holiday season where a lot of people start to
By 3 months,
buy new stuff.
It's unacceptable if they haven't ironed this stuff out in 3 months' time. Because it's not like it doesn't work. If it didn't work for everyone, then yeah, that's a disaster and that needs addressing straight away. But like I said, I've tested a lot of this stuff. Not super in depth. Like I said, I've only used 1 or 2 types of memory, but it's worked flawlessly for me. And there's a lot of people here saying, I've had no issues, but then I know there are a lot of people that are having issues. But again, I don't know exactly what they're doing. Like if I went and configured their system, would I be able to get it working? No worries. I don't know. So it's a tough one. But yeah, Intel generally does execute better, but they have massive budgets, so they can afford
Well, of course, they're a much bigger company.
teams. So, and yeah, that's kind of why in some ways you can justify spending a bit more with Intel because they do a better job of some of that stuff. I think we're pretty well up to speed with the comments there.
Time to wrap up. Time to get some lunch.
Yeah, I'm pretty hungry actually.
Cool.
Pretty hungry. And no, Tim didn't bring Nando's. I saw that question in there.
There's no
somewhere.
Nando's anywhere near here, is there?
There's no takeaway food anywhere near here.
I passed a McDonald's on the way in.
Oh, that would have been half an hour ago.
Yeah, it was.
Right. No, I'm gonna cook Tim a steak. Try and toughen him up a bit with a steak.
Nice. Are you actually going to cook me a steak?
Can if you want. I bought some fresh steaks.
All right. Well, nice. I was like, are you serious? Because what do you know? You don't normally have a steak for lunch.
Yeah, I often have steaks.
For lunch?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
thought you were a smoothie man.
well, I do. I sometimes I have a smoothie. Sometimes I have a steak.
Do you have a smoothie and a steak?
Sometimes I have a smoothie and a steak.
Do you
So,
smoothie the steak?
not usually.
Yeah, that would be gross. All right, let's wrap this one up, and we'll see you probably back here next month.
Last one. Sorry, Steve, is the shed done? No, I will be making some BTS videos, and I plan on filming much more of it. So I've got to install the balustrade on the outside deck, and I've got to do the entire interior. So I will be kicking that off once things cool down on the channel over the next few weeks, and getting back into it. Got to install insulation, do some wiring, all that kind
I
of
actually
stuff.
haven't seen it. You've got to show me, because I haven't
Well, we
been
can
here
go-
for like a year. So
We can go have a look in a minute. But yes, there'll be more videos on that coming up soon. So yeah, Mega Mix steak for lunch.
All right.
Thanks for the support, guys.
Thanks.
We'll see you soon.